They made me train my replacement 3 hours after my father's funeral. That is how this story begins. My father died on a Tuesday morning. It was a sudden stroke, sharp and unexpected. He was a strong man who could still split oak logs in the freezing cold of January, but he had suddenly collapsed, face first into a sink filled with dirty breakfast dishes. I took only 2 days off from work to handle the arrangements. On Friday morning, with my eyes swollen from the sleep I had failed to get, I walked into the software development laboratory. That was when I saw Audrey Bennett. She was 23 years old and was sitting in my ergonomic chair, smiling at my monitors as if they had invited her in. "The department director told me you would show me how things run," she said with a cheerful chirp. "I am your new shadow for the next few weeks." I remember the lukewarm coffee in my hand tasted like battery acid. I remember blinking slowly, not saying a word, then walking straight to the restroom, locking myself in the corner stall, and dry heaving until my ribs felt like they were bruising. Let me rewind the timeline of events. 2 months before that Friday, I had submitted a formal engineering proposal to the company leadership. It was an inline data compression algorithm that could slash network latency by 43% without requiring any infrastructure overhaul or expensive hardware replacements. The proprietary logic was clean, elegant, and highly efficient. I called the system Veloce. I had built it entirely from scratch in my spare time, while still managing their overflowing support ticket queue and ghostwriting the technical briefs that Nicholas Thorne, our department director, would parade around the executive floor as if they were his own creations. When I formally asked Nicholas for a salary increase and a promotion to compensate for the extra hours, the valuable intellectual property, and the actual revenue Veloci would generate, he laughed right in my face. He laughed and said that I should be thankful I was even employed in this economy. I was so thankful that I went home that very night, logged into a secure virtual private network, and registered the internet domain Velocheflow. I did not sleep at all that night. I stripped my proprietary compression code from every company development server, obfuscated the source files, and reseeded the primary module into a private sandbox environment that only I could access. I filed provisional patent paperwork the same weekend my cousin Sean Vance got married in Boston. I did not go to the wedding. I was far too busy surgically removing every digital fingerprint that could possibly tie the Veloci algorithm to the company's servers. They did not notice my activities because Nicholas was too busy preparing for a presentation to show off for our venture capital investors. The human resources department was too busy pretending that employee burnout was a simple vibes issue rather than the direct result of making one senior engineer perform the work of 4 people. No one actually read the lines of code I had buried like hidden diamonds in their concrete software stack. Now back to Audrey. She was a pleasant young woman. Of course she was. That is how the corporate machine operates. They select someone shiny, agreeable, and polite in a way that completely disarms you. I did not harbor any personal hatred toward the young woman. Instead, I hated what she represented. She represented the polite erasure of everything I had bled for and built at this company over the last 6 years of my life. She asked intelligent questions and wrote down every explanation in a leather notebook. Nicholas Thorne walked by our desks at one point in the afternoon. He clapped Audrey on the back as if she had just discovered gravity herself. Then he glanced at me with a smug grin and remarked that knowledge transfer is the true mark of a team player. I forced a smile. 10 minutes later, I took a brief restroom break, pulled out my personal phone, and texted my intellectual property attorney. I told him to go ahead and file the utility patent, instructing him to push the timeline forward as fast as possible. By the following Tuesday, Veloce was fully incorporated as a limited liability company in the state of Delaware. We established neutral branding and clean financial books. The software licensing model was already designed to be modular and highly competitive, featuring an airtight end-user license agreement. Within a few days, I had a short list of potential clients lined up from a private online community of data pipeline engineers who did not know or care about my day job. They only cared that my compression engine worked. Then came the first major twist in the corporate game. On Friday afternoon, Nicholas called an emergency, all-hands meeting. He announced that the company was pivoting its entire data strategy. He proudly claimed that we had signed an exclusive contract with an external third-party compression vendor to integrate their cutting-edge technology into our enterprise architecture. Nicholas claimed this new software would completely transform our latency overhead. He called it a technological miracle. I watched the slideshow presentation from the very back of the crowded room. Slide 4 featured a system diagram I had sketched on a paper napkin during my lunch break in March. Slide 9 displayed my custom interface palette. And on slide 14, the corporate logo of the vendor appeared on the screen. It was VeloceFlow. Nicholas had absolutely no idea that he had just licensed my own software. He did not know because I had sold the software license through a series of shell companies with a generic procurement front, buried deep within a web of non-disclosure agreements, and passed through contracts that even I could barely untangle. He had signed on the dotted line for an annual license fee of $280,000. The department budget exploded, but the legal team did not even blink, and the finance department called it a strategic infrastructure investment. Nicholas ended the meeting with a smug speech, welcoming everyone to a new era of innovation. I nodded, smiled, and walked out of the room. I immediately opened an email notification from my attorney. He confirmed the final utility patent, filing under my full name, Julian Vance. My name was printed in bold letters right at the top of the official document. Nicholas was going to see it very soon. Nicholas Thorne finally saw my name on the patent document the following Wednesday afternoon. It was exactly 3:17 in the afternoon when the storm broke. I know the precise minute because I was in the middle of rebooting a critical Jenkins integration pipeline and received 3 separate Slack notifications from him in less than 10 seconds. Each message was more frantic and unhinged than the last. The first ping was simply my name in capital letters, Julian. The second message ordered me to get into his private office immediately. The third was a screenshot of the public patent registry page with a single line highlighted in red. The line identified the sole inventor of the technology as Julian Vance. I took my time finishing the reboot sequence, verified the deployment logs, and slowly walked down the hallway. I moved at a leisurely pace, feeling the heavy weight of my own satisfaction. The door to the director's office was already wide open. Nicholas was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his face flushed and the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. He looked as if he was about to burst out of his expensive department store suit. "You filed a patent on company time," he shouted before I could even take a seat. I sat down in the leather chair, crossed my legs, and maintained a perfectly calm, almost meditative composure. "No, Nicholas," I replied. "I filed the provisional application after hours, using my personal laptop and my own financial resources. I did not use a single piece of company equipment, nor did I write a single line of that code during my working hours. But I truly appreciate you noticing the filing." Nicholas blinked in utter confusion, as if I had just spoken to him in an ancient, dead language. "You used our proprietary resources," he hissed, leaning over his desk. "That intellectual property belongs to Apex Systems." I calmly reached into my bag and slid a printed folder onto his desk. I explained that our own internal server logs showed absolutely no trace of the original Veloce algorithm. There was not a single code commit, no merge requests, and no developer branches containing that logic. I had kept notarized Git repository logs, time-stamped local backups, and signatures from independent legal witnesses from the very beginning. I asked him if he really wanted to fight this ownership dispute in a federal court, warning him that he would lose. Nicholas did not even open the folder. He just stared at it as if it were a live explosive. "This is pure sabotage," he whispered, his voice trembling with anger. "No," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "This is simply the logical consequence of telling a skilled engineer that he should be grateful just to have a job." Nicholas tried to play the moral card, claiming that I had betrayed the company's trust and that Audrey Bennett was completely devastated by my actions. I raised an eyebrow and asked him which part devastated her more: the fact that I had built a revolutionary compression engine by myself, or the fact that he was too lazy to notice what his own staff was doing. He had no answer because Nicholas did not deal in reality. He only cared about corporate optics, and the optics were starting to look disastrous. That evening, the corporate legal department sent an urgent email requesting a formal clarification of the patent ownership. I responded by sending them a compressed file containing a 52-page declaration of independent development. The documentation included personal credit card statements for the cloud services I had used, showing they were billed directly to my name. It also included the exact source code files, with creation timestamps that predated the company's first knowledge of the system. I made sure to carbon copy the chief operating officer on the email thread. By Friday morning, the corporate procurement team was in a state of absolute panic. I watched from my desk as various managers huddled in conference rooms. They were beginning to realize that the licensing contract Nicholas had signed with Veloce Flow was legally binding and completely locked. There were no refund clauses, no revocation rights, and the first quarterly payment of $70,000 had already been wired to my Delaware business account. The situation deteriorated further on Monday morning. My shell company issued a public press release announcing that Veloce Flow was entering into strategic licensing partnerships with 3 other mid-sized technology firms. These firms were direct competitors of Apex Systems. Each contract had been pre-negotiated, and the license fees were slightly discounted for early adopters. Suddenly, the miracle technology that Nicholas had promised would give our company an exclusive competitive edge was being utilized by our biggest rivals. Nicholas called my phone repeatedly throughout the day. I let every single call go to voicemail. I was no longer playing a defensive game. I held all the leverage, and Nicholas had not even noticed the primary trap I had set for him. He began arriving at the office much earlier than usual. That was how I knew he was truly terrified. This was a manager who normally rolled into the office at 10:30 in the morning holding an organic latte, looking as if the universe owed him a profit share. Now he was sitting at his desk by 7:45 in the morning with unwashed hair and a misbuttoned shirt, trying to manage a disaster that had already compromised his career. And by the middle of the following week, the tension in the office had become almost unbearable. The vice president of finance began making casual stops by my desk, asking vague questions about our cloud infrastructure costs. The human resources department sent me a calendar invitation with a title that felt like an obvious trap, labeling the meeting as a routine check-in regarding company culture and compliance. I accepted the invitation immediately, feeling completely prepared. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and nervous energy. 3 people sat on the opposite side of the table, a senior corporate lawyer, the head of human resources, and an external legal consultant named Victoria Cross. Victoria wore a sharp gray blazer and possessed the cold warmth of a vending machine. "We have conducted a thorough review of the development timeline," Victoria began, keeping her eyes fixed on her notes. "We want to know if you would be open to redefining the terms of the Veloce Flow licensing agreement." I nodded slowly and asked them what they had in mind. The lawyer exhaled in relief, thinking I was ready to cooperate. I looked them in the eye and stated my terms. I would agree to a flat buyout of $4,800,000. No ongoing licensing fees, no restricted terms, just a single payment, and I would transfer the patent ownership and walk away. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. The corporate lawyer blinked, as if he had just been hit with a high-voltage taser. The head of human resources tried to recover her composure, using her trained corporate empathy voice to suggest that we should avoid litigation and focus on a collaborative solution. I smiled and explained that my offer was the collaborative's solution. I pointed out that if I wanted to play hardball, I could release the next version of the compression module as an open-source project. That action would instantly destroy the competitive advantage they were paying for and obliterate their market value. But I told them I was a team player, so I was given a chance to buy it first. None of them had a response. Victoria Cross immediately shifted her strategy, trying to threaten me with non-compete covenants and employment policy violations. She claimed that my employment contract prohibited any outside engineering work. I had anticipated this exact argument. I calmly explained to her that under local labor statutes, non-compete restrictions were legally void, and because Veloce Flow was registered in Delaware, Their local corporate policies had no jurisdiction over my independent intellectual property. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 261, a patent is recognized as personal property because they had neglected to have me sign an invention assignment agreement. When I started working 6 years ago, the default ownership remained with the inventor. The legal team sat in stunned silence. Victoria Cross simply adjusted her pen, staring at me with quiet hostility. I stood up, gathered my things, and left the room. When I stepped out into the hallway, I found Audrey Bennett waiting for me. She looked completely overwhelmed, as if she had just discovered that the entire corporate hierarchy was a sham. "Did you really build the entire compression engine by yourself, Julian?" she asked in a quiet whisper. I shrugged my shoulders and told her that in this industry, you either build the system or you become a cog in it. I asked her if she would have believed me if I had tried to tell her the truth weeks ago. She remained silent, unable to dispute the reality of our workplace. That night, I uploaded version 2.0 of the Veloce software to our customer licensing portal. The new update improved data processing runtimes by 12% and reduced server processor loads by 18%. I also added a subtle back-end digital watermark system that could trace any unauthorized copies or modifications of the source code. The next morning, I posted a job listing on a public board. The listing stated that VelociFlow was hiring remote software engineers. I specified that we had a zero-tolerance policy for corporate politics and valued clean code above all else. Within 24 hours, my inbox was flooded with applications from talented developers. My trap was fully set, and Nicholas Thorne was about to make the exact mistake that every desperate manager makes when their ego overrides their intelligence. Nicholas decided to go directly to the board of directors. He did not present a formal report or a slide deck. Instead, he whispered in hallways and attempted to spin his failure as a strategic triumph. He claimed that he had personally discovered VelociFlow and championed the partnership. He told the board members that I was a highly skilled but volatile employee who lacked the maturity required for a leadership role. This was the same director whose idea of leadership was buying 2 cheap cheesecakes for the development team after they had worked 80 hours in a single week to meet a deadline. I learned about his maneuvering because Diana Ward, my close ally in the finance department, forwarded me an internal email thread. The subject line read "Contingency Planning for System Architect Exit." The message contained bullet points analyzing my value, treating me like a liability they needed to manage or pay off. Diana had added a short note at the bottom, warning me that they were preparing to hire another systems engineer under a different job title. I did not reply to her email. I did not need to because I had already initiated my next move. And during the second week of November, a junior developer named Jared Cole made a minor error. Jared was a hard-working young man who frequently suffered from stress sweats during team meetings. He was working under immense pressure because Nicholas had cut the quality assurance team down to save budget numbers. Nicholas had personally ordered Jared to push an untested software build directly to our staging environment to show progress to the board. The database schema conflict was due to Nicholas forcing an old database backup to run with our new pipeline structure. Jared had warned him that the schemas were incompatible and would result in direct data corruption. But Nicholas had arrogantly dismissed his warnings, telling him to stop being a bottleneck and to push the code anyway. When the database inevitably crashed, Nicholas did not take any responsibility, but instead blamed the entire failure on Jared's supposed incompetence. Nicholas decided to humiliate Jared in front of the entire department during our morning stand-up meeting. Nicholas called the mistake an unforced failure and loudly declared that some people simply were not cut out for engineering at this level. Jared turned pale and walked out of the building. I followed Jared to the parking garage and found him sitting in his car, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. I tapped on the window and told him that he had not crashed the database. He looked up at me with glassy eyes and asked how I could be sure. I explained that the module that had failed was actually version 1.1 of the Veloce engine, which Nicholas had personally ordered to be pushed to staging without going through our standard quality assurance checks. I looked at Jared and asked if he wanted a real job, a position where he would not be punished for the mistakes of incompetent directors. I offered him a position at VelociFlow as our first official system engineer, with a starting salary of $120,000 a year and full remote flexibility. He stared at me in disbelief, but he accepted the offer on the spot. Over the next 3 days, I quietly reached out to 3 other senior developers on Nicholas's team. They were the engineers who actually kept the company's daily operations running while Nicholas took the credit. I met each of them individually at a quiet diner 3 blocks away from the office. I met Owen, our database manager, and Grant, our lead front-end developer, along with Nolan, who ran our security integrations. We sat in a back booth of the diner, eating sandwiches and reviewing VelociFlow's business plan. I explained our growth project and showed them the licensing revenue we were already collecting from our external clients. I offered them each a 20% salary increase, full health coverage, and equity options in VelociFlow that would vest over 4 years. They did not hesitate. All 3 of them submitted their formal resignation letters to HR by Friday afternoon. Nicholas's department was suddenly left without a single senior developer who knew how to maintain the core system. Nicholas did not even notice their departures initially, because he was too busy trying to convince the board that I was a liability. He eventually scheduled a formal performance review for me, inviting the head of human resources and a representative from the board of directors, hoping to terminate me for cause. I walked into the conference room with a calm smile, sat down, and immediately slid a secure USB drive across the table. Nicholas looked at the drive and asked if it was my resignation letter. I told him to plug it in and open the documents. When he did, his face drained of color. The drive contained copies of financial ledgers showing that Nicholas had been funneling department funds into a sham consulting firm named Peak Layer Consulting. The record showed that Peak Layer had been billing the company $33,000 every month for integration support services that were never actually performed. The documents also included digital signatures and network logs, proving that the consulting firm was owned by Nicholas's brother-in-law. I pointed out that Nicholas had authorized these payments without disclosing the massive conflict of interest to the board. I explained that under local penal statutes regarding corporate forgery and breach of fiduciary duty, these documents were more than enough to justify a full audit and criminal charges. The board representative went completely pale as she read through the documents. Nicholas began to stammer, claiming that I was attempting to blackmail him. I looked him in the eye and explained that this was not blackmail, but rather a simple business choice. I told him he could either take an immediate early retirement and blame it on personal health reasons, or I would deliver these files directly to the state prosecutor and the corporate audit committee. The board representative looked at Nicholas and asked him how quickly he could clear out his desk. The room fell silent. Nicholas did not say another word. He stood up and walked out of the office. When the company newsletter announced his departure 3 days later, it stated that he had decided to step down to spend more time with his family. I printed out the announcement, framed it, and hung it on the wall of my home office. It served as a constant reminder of the day the corporate machine lost its gears. And 3 days after Nicholas Thorne resigned from the company, a large vase of expensive white orchids arrived at my desk. The card attached to the flowers was signed by the chief operating officer. It thanked me for my continued dedication to innovation and suggested that we should work together to build something extraordinary. I carried the vase to the front reception desk and left it there without saying a word. I knew the corporate leadership was not done trying to manage me. They were simply changing their tactics from open hostility to polite manipulation. On Monday morning, the chief operating officer called me into her office for what she described as a vision alignment meeting. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and spoke with a forced, sweet tone. "Julian," she said, "you have proven your value to this organization. We want to create a new role specifically for you. We want to appoint you as our executive technologist at large." I asked her to explain the details of the position. She explained that I would have a significant salary increase, but would no longer have any direct reports or budget authority. I smiled and told her that the title sounded like a polite way of placing me in a gilded cage where I could not influence the department. I told her that my specialty was building systems of value, not serving as corporate decoration. I thanked her for the offer and declined. By the following Thursday, I had officially resigned from Apex Systems. I moved my growing team at VelociFlow into a spacious, light-filled co-working office located in a renovated historic library downtown. Our business was expanding rapidly. 14 external companies had already licensed the Veloci compression engine, and we had received 2 funding offers from venture capital firms. I turned down both investment offers because I did not want to answer to another board of directors. I wanted to maintain absolute control over my technology. Meanwhile, Apex Systems was attempting to implement a plan to reduce their dependency on my software. Diana Ward forwarded me a confidential document from their quarterly strategy planning sessions. The document outlined a plan to reverse engineer VelociFlow version 2.1 within 9 months. They believed they could copy my algorithms and cancel our licensing contract. However, they did not understand the architecture of the system. I had designed version 2.1 with an intentional software dependency. The system was designed so that if any unauthorized modifications were made to the core modules, the data packet pipeline would begin to slowly corrupt after exactly 6 months of continuous operation. The corruption would occur intermittently, causing random system errors that would be nearly impossible for their engineers to trace. The first major system failure occurred 42 days later at their primary data center in northern Utah. The engineers deployed a software patch designed to bypass my licensing verification, which triggered a massive thermal cascade in their server racks. The processors overheated, and the entire database went offline for nearly 12 hours. The outage made the national technology news boards. I watched the coverage from my office, sipping tea while reading reports of panicked managers trying to explain the failure. Within 3 weeks, Apex Systems had lost 2 of their largest enterprise customers. Both of those clients signed new contracts with VelociFlow to use our stable version 3.0 engine. The company's chief technology officer sent me a desperate email asking for an urgent consultation. I did not respond. He called my phone, and I let it ring. Then I received a message from Audrey Bennett. She told me that the department was facing layoffs and that many of my former colleagues were going to lose their jobs. I told her that I remembered every developer who had worked late to fix Nicholas's mistakes. I posted an announcement on our company website stating that former employees of Apex Systems would receive priority hiring status at VelociFlow. Within 3 days, we received 31 applications and we hired 12 of our former colleagues. The final collapse of the company was accelerated by a comprehensive financial audit. The forensic accountants discovered the full extent of Nicholas Thorne's fraudulent consulting fees, along with evidence of complicity from other senior managers. With their client base shrinking and their technology failing, the board of directors decided to liquidate the company's remaining assets. I met with the partner handling the liquidation process and submitted a formal bid to purchase their infrastructure, client contracts, and database pipelines. The partner remarked that my offer was extremely low. I told him that I was simply purchasing the remaining assets of a company that had failed to value its own engineers. The acquisition cleared 7 days later for a fraction of its original value. VelociFlow absorbed the assets, and we migrated the remaining clients to our own secure platform. 6 months after the acquisition, I stood on the main stage at a major international technology conference in Munich, Germany. I presented Veloci version 4.0 to a crowd of over 1,000 industry professionals. As I looked out at the audience, I noticed 2 former board members of Apex Systems sitting in the front row, watching me receive a standing ovation. I realized that my victory was not just about the money or the patent. It was about proving that the people who build the future are the ones who ultimately own it.